All right, so get ready, because on this deep dive, we're going to tackle a question that I think a lot of people have asked us about.
Yeah.
And it has to do with memory, and I think a question we all relate to.
Yeah.
What is the difference between, like, a normal forgetfulness, like senior moments, and something more serious like dementia?
It's a question that causes a lot of anxiety, I think, for
Mm.
people, and a lot of confusion.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have a great talk to guide us through this.
Yeah.
And it does a really nice job of using humor and also relatable stories
Yeah.
to really explain the science behind memory.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I really loved about this talk. It was very accessible
Yeah.
and kind of made me laugh a few times too.
Humor is a powerful tool
It is.
when dealing with some of these topics.
Yeah, so our mission for this deep dive, I guess, is to really kind of help all of you listening understand the mechanics of memory
Yeah.
and recognize the signs of both normal aging and dementia, and hopefully leave you with some practical takeaways.
Absolutely. And hopefully a few laughs along the way.
Yeah, definitely the source material had those. So let's start with something called working memory.
Okay.
And this is this idea of a temporary mental workspace. And I always think about it like a mental juggling act, where you can only keep so many balls in the air at once.
That's a great analogy. And it really gets at the fact that there's a limited capacity to working memory, right?
Yeah.
We can only hold about 5 to 8 chunks of information.
Chunks. So not like little bits of information, but chunks.
Chunks, yeah.
Oh,
So think about trying to remember a phone number.
right.
You can remember each digit individually, or you could chunk it into groups, right? Like
Yeah.
the area code, the prefix, and the line number.
Oh, right.
Suddenly, instead of remembering 7 individual numbers, you're remembering 3 chunks.
Right. That's so interesting because it's like we as humans naturally do that in so many different areas of life. It's
Yeah.
like we're always trying to find ways to take something really big and complicated and break it down.
Exactly. Into manageable pieces. And that's really what working memory is doing for us.
Okay.
And it's what allows us to plan, to organize, to focus,
Yeah.
and even to hold conversations
Yeah.
like we're doing now.
Yeah, and the source had this great example, and it was about making coffee.
Yes.
And deciding to make coffee, and then all of a sudden the phone rings.
Oh, I know where this is going.
And it's one of those phone calls
Yeah.
that is not like a quick, "Hey, what's up?"
Right.
It's like a long, involved.
Long, detailed conversation.
Yes, and like lots of information is coming at you.
Lots of new information.
Yeah.
Yeah, meeting times, places to be,
Yeah.
to bring all this stuff.
Right, and suddenly your working memory is completely overloaded,
Yeah.
and that original intention of I was going to go make coffee is gone.
It's vanished. Yeah.
And you're left standing there in the kitchen thinking, why am I in here?
Exactly.
And it's so funny because, like,
It's so relatable.
it's so relatable. It happens to me all the time.
All the time.
And I think it happens to a lot of people listening. And it highlights how memory changes as we age.
Yeah, so younger brains with less clutter, they can rely on simple cues
Oh, okay.
to kind of jog their memory.
So, like, seeing the coffee pot might be enough to be like, oh, yeah, coffee.
Exactly.
Okay.
But as we get older, that mental attic, gets a bit more crowded
Sure.
with memories and experiences, and those simple cues get kind of buried in the clutter.
Like trying to find your keys in a really messy room. It's just like you can't find anything.
And so the source refers to this as needing what they call episodic cues,
Okay.
meaning we need to recreate the whole context
Oh, wow.
where the thought originated
Yeah.
in order to actually retrieve that memory.
So instead of just seeing the coffee pot, I have to actually think back to like, okay, I was in the living room watching TV and then I got up and I was walking to the kitchen and then, oh yeah, coffee.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I love how the speaker presented this because there was such humor in it.
Yeah.
He was like, is it irritating? Is it frustrating? And you could just feel everybody in the audience nodding their heads because we've all been there.
We've all been there.
It's like, yes, it is.
And it's so true. And I think that was the thing that I really liked about this talk is that it pointed out that sometimes forgetting things as we age is just a matter of needing stronger cues
Those are cues. Yeah.
to access those memories.
Yeah. And there are things we can do to help ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like keeping notepads handy,
Ooh, I like that.
especially by phones.
Yes.
That's just a really simple strategy.
Okay, so that's normal age-related forgetfulness.
Right.
Annoying, but manageable.
Manageable. Yeah.
Now let's shift gears and talk about dementia.
Okay. So this is where things get a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, okay.
The talk used the same making coffee scenario,
Okay.
but with a really crucial difference.
Okay.
This time, the person finds a dirty glass in the sink. And instead of thinking, oh, somebody must have forgotten to wash this, they create this whole elaborate story about people sneaking into their basement,
So it's not just forgetting, it's misinterpreting information.
misinterpreting and creating illogical narratives.
Right, to kind of fill in those gaps.
Yeah, and that's one of the key distinctions between typical forgetfulness and dementia.
Yeah.
These narratives can be very distressing, both for the individual and for their loved ones.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, if you're constantly feeling like you're losing control of your own reality.
Yeah, and you don't know what's real and what's not.
Right.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
The talk went on to give another example of a phone call
Okay.
where even with a reminder, a cue that usually works for somebody with normal forgetfulness,
Right.
the person with dementia doesn't remember. The conversation becomes very confused
Oh, wow.
and even accuses the caller of having dementia.
Wow.
So it's no longer forgetfulness.
Right.
At this point, it's something much more fundamental.
Yeah, it's a shift in, like, thinking and behavior.
Exactly. And as the speaker said, it's no longer forgetfulness.
Yeah.
Saying, don't you remember, is not going to help. We need a change in gear.
Yeah, and that leads to a really crucial point, right? If you or someone you know is experiencing these memory changes that are concerning,
Yes,
it's so important to seek professional evaluation.
absolutely. Don't just write it off as senior moments.
Right.
Early diagnosis and intervention can make a huge difference.
So how do we recognize the difference? How can we tell if it's just those normal senior moments or if it's something more?
One of the key things to look for is that shift from forgetting to distorting reality.
Oh,
Are you simply misplacing your keys, or are you convinced that somebody has stolen them?
right. Okay. Big difference.
Yeah, and are plotting against you.
Okay. Are there any other red flags we should be aware of?
There are, and we'll dive into those in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. I'm ready to learn more, but before we move on, is there anything else about this change in gear idea that you think our listeners should know right now?
Yes, actually, there's one more thing I want to highlight from this part of the talk that I think is really important. It's the idea that when somebody's experiencing dementia, that don't you remember is not a helpful question.
Right.
In fact, it can often make things worse.
Yeah, I can imagine constantly being reminded of your memory lapses would be,
That's frustrating.
yeah, incredibly frustrating and also probably demoralizing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of focusing on what's lost,
Yeah.
the speaker emphasized the importance of shifting our focus to what remains.
Oh, okay.
The ability to connect, to feel emotions,
Yeah.
to experience joy. These are all things that are still very much present,
Yeah.
even as cognitive abilities decline.
That's such a beautiful way to think about it. And it reminds me of a quote I read recently in a book about dementia care. And it said, focus on the person, not the disease.
I love that.
And I just thought that was so powerful because it's so easy to get caught up in
And the medical aspect,
the medical aspects, the diagnosis,
the treatments.
the treatments, all of that,
Yeah.
that we forget that we're dealing with a human being
Yeah,
who has this rich history and a unique personality and, just a whole world of experiences that still matter.
absolutely. And those experiences, even if they're not always accurately remembered,
Mm-hmm.
they still shape how they interact with the world.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the importance of understanding those illogical narratives we talked about.
Right.
They might seem strange or even upsetting to us.
Right.
But to the person with dementia, they make perfect sense
Yeah.
within the reality that they're experiencing.
So instead of arguing or trying to correct them, we need to find ways to connect with them
Yes,
on their level.
precisely. And the talk gave this great example. Imagine somebody is convinced that people are sneaking into their basement. Instead of saying, no, that's not happening, you're imagining things, which is only going to lead to agitation and defensiveness.
Right.
You could try saying something like, that sounds really scary. It must be unsettling to feel like your home isn't safe.
Right.
You see the difference?
It's such a simple shift in language.
Right.
But I can see how it would make a world of difference.
It acknowledges their feelings without dismissing their reality.
Exactly.
It's about validation and empathy, not correction.
Yeah.
And this applies to so many different aspects of interacting with someone with dementia.
Right.
Instead of focusing on what they can't do or remember,
Right.
we can focus on trying to engage them in activities that bring them joy
Right.
and stimulate their senses.
Like what kind of activities?
Music is a really powerful one.
Yeah.
Even if somebody can't remember their loved ones' names, they
Yeah.
might still be able to sing along to a familiar song or tap their foot to the beat. Art can be very therapeutic,
Yeah.
allows for nonverbal expression and creativity. Even simple things like gardening or going for a walk
Yeah.
can provide that sensory stimulation and a sense of connection to the world around them.
Yeah. It's amazing to think that even as cognitive abilities decline, there's still so many ways to connect
They're all.
with someone on a deeper level.
And that's what I think is so crucial for caregivers and loved ones to remember.
Yeah.
It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and helpless when you're faced with dementia.
Right.
But there are things we can do to make a positive difference in someone's life.
This talk has really opened my eyes to the importance of shifting our perspective when it comes to dementia.
Yeah.
It's not just about managing symptoms or trying to cure the disease. It's about recognizing the humanity of the person living with dementia
Yes.
and finding ways to support their well-being, even in the face of cognitive decline.
Beautifully said, and that leads to an important question for our listener. Knowing what we now know about the differences between normal forgetfulness and dementia, how can we shift our own attitudes and behaviors to better support those experiencing dementia?
That's a big question and one that deserves, I think, some serious thought.
It does.
But I think this deep dive has given us a great starting point.
It has.
We've learned about the mechanics of memory, the challenges of dementia, the importance of empathy validation, and focusing on the person, not the disease.
And while we've covered a lot of ground today, there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve into some practical strategies for supporting those with dementia, as well as some of the latest research and resources that are available.
I'm looking forward to it. This is a topic that I think we can all benefit from learning more about. It's fascinating to me how much our understanding of dementia has evolved over the years.
Well, absolutely.
It's not just about memory loss anymore.
Right.
We're recognizing the complexity of this condition and how it really impacts every aspect of a person's life.
Yeah, it really does touch everything. And I think that shift in understanding is so important.
Yeah.
Because it allows us to kind of move beyond that fear and that stigma
Right.
and embrace a more compassionate and person-centered approach to care.
Yeah, and speaking of care, you mentioned earlier that we'd be diving into some practical strategies for supporting those with dementia.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that caregivers or loved ones can do to create a more positive and supportive environment?
Well, one of the most important things is to create a sense of routine and predictability.
Oh, okay.
People with dementia often thrive in environments that are structured and consistent.
So having regular meal times,
Exactly.
bedtime routines,
Yes.
familiar activities.
Familiar activities.
Okay.
And that can help reduce anxiety and confusion.
Yeah, it's like creating a sense of safety and security in a world that can feel increasingly unpredictable.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What about communication?
Yeah.
We talked earlier about the importance of validation and empathy.
Right. But are there specific communication techniques that can be helpful?
There are, and one technique that's often recommended is called reminiscence therapy.
Oh.
And it involves engaging the person with dementia in conversations about their past.
Oh, okay.
Using things like photos, music, or other prompts
Okay.
to kind of trigger memories and spark conversation.
I can see how that would be so beneficial because it allows them to tap into a part of their brain that's still relatively intact.
Right.
And experience that sense of connection to their own personal history.
Exactly. And it can also be a really wonderful way for loved ones to connect with the person on a deeper level.
Right.
Sharing those stories and memories that maybe they've forgotten.
It sounds like a beautiful way to bridge the gap between the past and the present.
It really is.
Are there any other communication tips that caregivers should keep in mind?
Another important one is to use clear and simple language.
Okay.
Avoiding any jargon or complex sentence structures.
It's also helpful to speak slowly and patiently.
Yeah.
And give the person plenty of time to process what you're saying.
It's about meeting them where they are, both cognitively and emotionally.
Exactly. And remember, communication is a two-way street.
Yeah.
So pay attention to their nonverbal cues.
Right.
Like the facial expressions and body language.
Yeah.
Those can often tell you more than words can.
It really is about creating an environment where the person with dementia feels safe, respected, and understood.
Yeah.
But I imagine caregiving can be incredibly challenging.
It is.
Both physically and emotionally. What resources are out there to support caregivers?
Well, there's a wealth of resources available both online and in local communities.
Yeah.
The Alzheimer's Association, for example, has a ton of information on their website, including tips for caregivers, support groups, and local chapters that offer services and assistance.
That's great to know. It's so important for caregivers to remember that they're not alone.
Right.
Like, there's help available.
Absolutely. And seeking out that support, whether it's through a support group or therapy or respite care,
Yeah.
can make a world of difference
In a caregiver's well-being.
in a caregiver's well-being for sure.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've learned so much about, the complexities of memory,
Yeah,
the challenges of dementia, and the importance of a compassionate and person-centered approach to care.
I agree. And it's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you and to our listener.
Yes.
We hope this deep dive has provided you with valuable knowledge and a sense of empowerment.
Yeah.
As you navigate this really complex terrain, remember, knowledge is power.
It is.
And by understanding dementia, we can help create a more supportive and inclusive world for everyone.
That's beautifully said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of discovery.